Hey everyone, Eggman here with another video, and there's been a lot of discussion online that I've seen where people saying, like, what are the best decks now that we have not only this new format, but within the format, there's these new restriction lists that are pretty changing for this meta in general. And so I've done a lot of research, and a lot of these are more theory craft decks that are not obviously tested 100% because we've only been in this restriction list meta for a little bit, but I've got 20 different deck lists to go over with you guys real quick. They can all be found on my website, Eggman Events, in the team deck list section, which I'm going to continue to update as we get deeper into this meta. And I also have all of this data that we're going to be getting. Obviously, some of it doesn't work anymore since it is like Japanese OP10, which is a different format from us, but I will be having some events coming up soon. We have official events for the English version too, and I'm really just excited for what this format looks for us and the possibilities for it as well. So I'm also going to probably have a tier list in about a week or so. I just want to do some more testing and get a better idea of what the meta looks like before just kind of spitting out a tier list without much testing either. So that's kind of the idea. We've got a bunch of decks. They're kind of separated by color. I've kind of picked one side or the other for multicolor leaders, but they should be all linked in the description, as well as the deck list form, or not the form, but the page here, so you can check that out too. So make sure to hit that like and subscribe also if you guys haven't already, and let's just jump into the red deck. So first we got Marco, which is one of my favorite leaders by a while. I played a lot of it in OP08. I didn't play a lot of it in OP09 just because I didn't really like the fact that like Blackbeard was around for as much as it was. And this is kind of like a bit of a tricky deck because also it is, still a Blackbeard meta, if not more so. It means that like Sanji is really difficult to play in this deck for that reason. But we also just have the potential to just not use Sanji and just kind of have more of a mid-range deck because of it. And I think that's something that's really helpful for it. So I also think we are pretty good at being like a somewhat control deck, right? Specifically against Doflamingo. Since they don't have Jinbei anymore, that matchup's a little bit easier. It's very easy for us to like remove a body while developing a body using cards like Marco and the like. I still do like the Emporio package, which is what we're using as well. We don't have a lot of new cards from us, but we do have the Monet, which is a great 2-drop, which again can be played off the Emporio. But also we do have the Divine Departure, which this does let us be like defensive with the counter effect, but also the main. We get rid of an 8k or less, which with an additional Dawn on our leader gets us a 10k or less, and we can use Otama to get rid of a 12k. So just having like a way to get rid of 10-drop Teach in that matchup too helps us out a whole lot. It means we just kind of go wider with some of this like tempo cards. Newgate also lets us get some removal on some characters too, since it is an activate main. And I think this deck is really interesting for what it is. So I haven't done a lot of testing, but I think it is in an okay spot. And we just have to be careful about decks like maybe Zoro being a little bit faster for us. But again, we do have ways to remove cards like Chopper and others because of cards like our 5-drop Marco in tangent with our leader effect. So I think this deck is fun. I've been enjoying it, and we'll see if it does anything with OP10. Next up, you got Shanks, and Shanks has been one of the strongest leaders since release in OP09. It did get second place at Worlds in OP09 format, and we are in OP10. And generally, you're going to see like Red just got like a really cool amount of cards for their card pool, including the Tony Chopper. This being like a really good 2K that also doubles as a blocker if you need to is fantastic, and I think it's great for like a just generically good 2K for red in general. I do think this deck also has kind of the same thing with Marco, where our removal is really fantastic. We do also have access to Divine Departure. It is also a Red Hair Pirates card, so if you want to run more of like a Red Hair Pirates and play like the Ultra Searcher, you can do that too. We also have like Building Snake, being able to use this to give the minus 3k power to something and get that additional removal with something like Backman. I think it's something that's helpful for trying to get some trades on boards for more like aggressive builds. So, and then obviously once we get to the late game, we have a bunch of ways to play bodies like Newgate, Silvers, Monkey D. Dragon, and also the Shanks 10-drop as well. So nothing too crazy for this. Not a lot to change. I have seen some like animal builds still. I think that's still powerful for it, and a lot of kind of different ways to play this deck. Probably one of the best like generic red leaders that we have. But we do kind of still focus on like getting the top end and just kind of hoping we see this top end as well. But here it is. And then next up, we've got Zoro, and I honestly think Zoro is going to be probably one of the stronger decks in this format. Even though we're not running a whole lot of new cards, we do still run like the animal package with the Tony Chopper, which has been very strong, especially since there is going to be less removal on the low end from Rob Lucci being, I think, a little less present. And Doflamingo is still going to be present, but not as much of a force as it used to be. And because of that, like the fact that Law is not going to be as present to get rid of this frame 1 means that we do have a chance to get some really early aggression against those decks. So that's something that's really strong. And I do think we do get some great cards from the set, from the Star decks specifically, meaning the Luffy. This being able to, on 5, be a 6K, but also give the Dawn to our Zoro, which means that we're able to be a 6K with the leader, but also give the 1K to everything else like we normally do, is very good. So I think this has been a fantastic card for most red, aggressive leaning red decks that we have. We also do have the Sanji, which is just Jambei on a 2K body, which is also absurd in its own way. So this has been very strong, and I think it's kind of replaces Jambei, but if you want to play 1 or 2 copies, since it can go on your leader, you can do that as well. And then just kind of the rest of like the animal package. So last thing, we've got the Mulgun. This card is fantastic for like some really good removal. The trigger comes up every once in a while, and I think like the best way to say like this is really good for specifically Usopp Captain Kid, like the 8-drop. You don't get rid of it inherently unless you use something like Otama, which we could be running, but we're not. It also could be like the 3-drop 2020 Chopper. Gets like the reduction on the when attacking, and then you can use the Mulligan to get rid of it. But even without that, you can use the -5 to make the Usopp Captain Kid a 3K. And if they have like a Rosinante, you can get rid of the Rosinante with this one card. So it's a great way to get rid of one of our kind of bad counters is with that 8-drop kid, and I think that's helpful for a lot of matchups too. So nothing too crazy here, but I think Zoro is going to be a very aggressive deck and probably pretty successful, at least in these first couple weeks, if not the entirety of OP10. The next up, you've got Smoker, and I've got 2 different builds. One I've been kind of testing a little bit more, and I posted this on Twitter, kind of more of the animal package, which we'll go over in a little bit. But honestly, as we can kind of transition from red to green anyway, since green's coming up, we just have some really good cards in green right now, right? 5-drop Smoker has been fantastic not only in this leader, but also in the Bonney as a way to get 1 Dawn active every turn so we can use our leader effects. We also do have the 8-drop Kid, which we just kind of mentioned. This is kind of I think going to be a cornerstone of this meta where your deck has to find a way to answer this. If not, you can get really walled out by it very successfully. And with cards like Rosinante as well as the new Tashigi, both these are going to be fantastic ways to keep this 8-drop kid alive, which is going to be tough for some decks to kind of answer that in their own ways. We also have the 9-drop Zoro, which we'll talk about this kind of intermittently throughout the next couple of decks, but with the fact that Ice Age isn't around anymore, which is probably the best way to get rid of this Zoro, there are a lot of decks that just kind of have to respect that this is going to hit the board, and we have no real way to answer it in a lot of ways. So we do have like Blackbeard being able to use like their 10-drop Teach to be able to prevent it from attacking, and there are other ways, especially like with Red, where we can get them enough of the minus to be able to remove it. But I also think there's a lot of decks that just simply can't do anything when we drop this, and because of this, it can win us the game on the spot by itself. So we'll see how it does in this meta, but I think it's something that if you are running a green deck compared to where we were last format, you can probably play this, and it's not the worst card to play. And some decks really excel with it too. So we got that there. And then we also do have like the more aggressive leaning one, and this is a Straw Hat build for it too. So if you want to put Zoro in it, you can. I didn't really find it super necessary, but it is an option if you do want one. The kind of main combo and kind of pieces that I really like with this deck is the 7-drop Monkey D. Luffy. You get to use this on 7 to be able to play a Film or Straw Hat type character with cost of 4 less from your hand, which can include this Roronoa Zoro, which then we can use the leader effect since we have a 7K here to give the 2 Dawn to make this a 7K rush attack. Then also has like the protection on KO effect, as well as we establish a body off of the Luffy. We do also have the Tony Chopper 3-drop green. So end of your turn, set up to one of your Odyssey type characters with the cost of 4 less as active. So this can include itself, which means that if we play the Tony Chopper 3-drop and we play it off there, that means we end the turn with both of these active, which means our opponent can really only attack us unless they have some kind of interaction on top of that. So it just means like generally we want to take the first or second hit so we have more cards to be able to defend our board. It means that we can be really aggressive with our cards too, and putting an extra Dawn on this Tony Chopper does not really mean a lot when we get 2 extra Dawn pretty much every turn due to our leader effect too. So I think all that's very strong, and also being able to play Hody as our kind of end game spot is great. And sometimes if we have like 3 life with 7 Dawn open, we can use this to, we don't mind playing it to take a card from our life to be a little bit more aggressive. So if you want to play Sanji, you can do that. And I think there's some other ways to build this, but I've been kind of enjoying this aggressive leaning build, and there's a lot going for it too. We just get like some really big numbers that some decks just have a hard time with. So here is the build there. And then kind of more formally moving to green, we've got Bonney, which is probably one of the better winners from this restriction list that we had. We did kind of lose the Ice Age Moria, which has been kind of the bane of our existence. Being able to make a wide board and get rid of our own, kind of with both those cards in conjunction, is really good. we never really had like a super bad issue against BY Luffy, which is probably rotated out. And then Doffy was kind of like a 50-50, but it's going to be a lot more in our favor because, you know, Jinbei getting an extra body on board made a huge difference. It just kind of represented sometimes another attack because we only get rid of one with our leader effect, like Dawn effect. So we do just have a better card pool of cards too. We mentioned it already. But we've got the Smoker as well as the Tashigi. This just being a 5/7, but with Banish, but also the fact that we can use this to, you know, get one Dawn open, so we can use our leader effect is really good. As mentioned, too, 8-drop Kid is something that's really worth building our deck around in this game. And we also still have Zoro and Shanks as from top end. So we're not playing 10-drop Doffy in this build. If you like it, you can definitely play it as well. And I think Green has a pretty good amount of cards in rotation right now as well. But Bonney's, I think, going to be pretty active in this format right now. And if you don't know how to play against it or you don't know what it does, you probably need to learn pretty quickly. But there it is. And then we also have Lim. This has been a leader from OP10, and it's one of the more unique leaders in this game. It has this effect that your character cards are played rested, but also activate main once per turn. You can rest 3 of your Dawn. You have to 1 Dawn from your Dawn deck and set it rested, and then you can play 1 Odyssey type character with cost of 5 or less from your hand. So this came in OP09, and there wasn't like a lot of Odyssey cards that were really worth it in that set, but with the inclusion of the 1-drop Lim from OP10 as well as the Edward Newgate and the Enel, and then also I think Mihawk came out of OP10. Yeah, all 3 of these are super good cards to help us get some advantage. This just lets you rest a 5 or less and also KO a 3 or less, which means that sometimes this can be like an Usopp on a 5/6 body. And now being able to draw 3 and trash 2 is really good, especially since we need to try and find our top end as quickly as possible. And then the Mihawk, sometimes this lets us attack twice with the big body. We can put all our Dawn on Newgate, except for 3 attack, and then we can play the Mihawk and then attack with it again. So that can be kind of like, this is kind of like a pseudo rush with how this deck works, which is really good. But also the fact that sometimes you just play this out for 3. You set it self rested if you can. So if you have like a 1-drop Lim and a 5-drop Mihawk, you get to, you know, attack the Lim or something, play the Mihawk out. Mihawk restand itself. The 1-drop Lim restands itself since it could set any of your Odyssey characters to active, and then your opponent kind of has to attack into you too. So it's kind of the similar way in the previous decks where you want to go to kind of like 2 cards in life. You want the first 2 hits to go to you, just so you have more ways to defend your cards on board, and that's really helpful in that way. So we're playing more aggressive. We're playing the Zoro 9-drop as kind of our game ender, since we get to ramp to it, and then we have ways to play like the Doflamingo to be a blocker and make it difficult for an opponent to interact with it. Sometimes it just kind of sits on board, and then you get able to do a lot of damage really quickly. Generally speaking, depending on the matchup too, you want to just end the turn with this active, which is really strong. Being able to, like most decks, if you leave this card active, they generally can't do anything about it. So that just means you can do 2 attacks every turn, and then you get to just keep it active. And then your opponent has to realize that they have to deal with it again on the next turn. So I think that's something that helps this deck work in a lot of ways. So you can also play more defensively. I've seen people play like 10-drop Doffy, as well as copies of like the 8-drop Uses Kid if you want to. We're not playing it in this build specifically, but it is something if you do want to build that as well. But I've been really enjoying Lim. I think it is a kind of linear, but it is very strong. And again, plays into the fact that people don't have really great answers to the Zoro, especially if we ramp to it. And we have consistency tools like Law as well as Enel to be able to either hard find it or draw more cards to be able to find it too. But there it is there. The next up we got Doflamingo, and sincerely, I think this deck is still in the meta. I do know we did lose Jinbei, and it was definitely a hit for this deck, but we still get to do a lot of the shenanigans that we are used to, in the fact that we are, like, 4-drop Law is still a really good card, and it does interact with a lot of cards that still exist in this format, including our own cards, so I think it is worth for what it is. Also, Boa being able to be a 4-drop 6, that also gives you, it's kind of like a 3-drop 6 with this effect, and just sets up your Doflamingo very well. And we do also just have our ways to interact with bigger boards with like the Red Rock, as well as like Raging Tiger and like the Femur to be able to kind of end games. So we're playing like, you know, 1 less big body a turn, right? Jinbei not existing does hurt us, but I do think that there are decks that still have to respect how strong this is, the amount of interaction, the amount of aggression they have. Still having like games where it's Martial Teach into Boa Hancock will make a big difference, and then being able to set up our next turn and also the next Doflamingo swing. It's just really strong. I think Teach and Boa are still very good cards for what this deck is doing. And when these 2 cards are around by themselves, I think most of Doflamingo is at least relevant, if not still like a meta contender. So I will be really interested to see how many people stay with Doffy, how good it is compared to the rest of the meta. And I don't think it's anything like it's gone or out of the meta, but it is definitely a little bit weaker. But this is what we got there. And then we also got Usopp, and I really don't know what to think about this leader in this meta right now. I haven't done enough testing with it personally. It does have its still fun little combo, right? And, you know, it was a blue and black deck that didn't use Ice Age or Moria generically anyway, so it didn't really get tangentially nerfed from that way. But I just don't know what our kind of matchups look like and how to really adapt to them. So I do think like the 7-drop Luffy is really strong. This does have us have ways to attack into like cards and get rid of cards on our opponent's body, specifically like Blackbeard. Really doesn't appreciate this card since we can attack the turn it's played and get some great interaction with that too. We still get to do like a wide board with Kiros and Rebecca. My only issue is that like it's just not always as consistent as you want it to be, and because of that, there are some ways like you do really have to find Colosseum on turn 1, and then if you don't, you feel like you're behind the entire game. So for a card that we only have 4 copies with, that technically if we go first, we have like, you know, additional ways to find it off either Leo or Rebecca. It's not like unheard of to find it pretty consistently on one, but it's just you're so dependent on it that it's kind of tough in like other matchups where, you know, it's the same thing as like Kaido, where if you don't find your Onigashima on 3 Dawn or 4 Dawn, you feel like you've just kind of lost the game already. And sometimes Usopp's like that because you do need to establish it. So the good thing is that it only costs 1, so sometimes like 4 or 5 Dawn, you're usually okay to play it. But it's something that this deck needs to do, and without that, you're pretty behind. But I think this deck has a chance. I'd have to do some more testing, and it really kind of depends on what the meta looks like, because we kind of have to adapt to what the aggression looks like too. And we're not like an aggressive deck, but we're also not like a super control deck. We're just kind of like this weird like middle of the road value deck, and that's kind of hard to balance when we're, you know, the meta is as unknown as it is. So I have some hope that it's going to be doing well in this format, but I don't know if this is the best way to look at it, but we'll see when we get there. All right, jumping to purple, we've got purple Luffy, and this deck didn't really change. It didn't really get any new cards from OP10 in the first place. None of the cards got hit, including Gum Gum Giant still being at 4 copies, which this deck really appreciates. And then also, we didn't, just nothing really changed for us. The biggest thing for us too is that our Luffy Taro is a lot safer to play against a lot of the meta. Like against Rob Lucci, they can just remove it, right, and use like an Ice Age and get the removal for it on top of like their leader reduction. We also had like the Doflamingo, which was just kind of a faster, more aggressive deck, so we usually lost the races to that one. So both those decks being less strong just kind of means that we have a chance to have a foothold and be kind of a better like mid-range aggressive deck, or I guess what, tempo aggressive deck with cards like the Luffy Taro, the Sanji, and the way that we go up our chain. So I do think like we are still pretty good against Teach. I do think like if Zoro's around, that could be a tougher matchup for us because we do take so many cards from our life. But it is something that we do have ways to interact with it as well. So I do like running the Brook. There are some times where I don't want to like use my leader effect again to go down to 1 life. Brook helps us do some really good kind of trades in the mid game as well. Being able to give 2 things minus 2k power, which is nice there too. We are playing the Linlin, being able to like get some removal and some help from that as well is good. And then also like the 7-drop Sanji, resting something so we can attack into it. Is something like it's the easiest form of removal, but it is still very good in its own way. So I'd have to do some more testing with it, but I do think like Luffy is going to be pretty present in this meta, and it definitely got buffed by the fact that the things that got removed were pretty tough matchups for it at sometimes. So I think this is going to be pretty present in the meta in general. And we also have red purple Luffy, and this was like one of my favorite decks in OP09, if not my favorite deck. And I think the deck is still kind of relevant for what it is, but it is something where you do have to find what the niche is, and if you do have ways to survive. If there's a lot of like Zoro and Betty and other aggressive decks that are faster than what Doffy was, but because they have like less value overall, Luffy really just crumbles to a lot of 6k swings a lot of the times, especially since we do need like that extra turn or 2 to set up, and that can be really, really tricky, again, if Zoro is really present. So it is something that, like, also since we play like 1 body of board a game, like Bonney is like a little bit of a rougher matchup. Cheech can be sometimes a rough matchup too, because again, we're only establishing like 1 body. And with all that combined, it feels like we didn't like the matchups that we lost weren't like necessarily like the matchups that got worse, like Doffy and Teach, since they got nerfed. We didn't really care. Like Doffy was still like a little bit not in our favor. But like Bonney is like really scary. Purple Luffy itself is still really scary. It's like a 50-50. And I just have to do some more testing if I think that this is something that can still top in this OP10 meta. So having Gum Gum Giant still around is really strong. I also think that like Zoro is probably a little bit safer to play now. I think less decks can interact with it inherently or have to spend more resources to get rid of it that you're usually okay with it. If you want to play more of like the event-centered build, you can definitely do that too. But I do want to just say, like, on the surface, I think Zoro is probably safer than what we've seen previously as well. So not much more to say. We'll see if my boy Red Purple Luffy can be in this meta in general. And here's the quick build. And talking about Red Purple leaders, we got Sugar, which is the new kind of variant for it. And I really don't know how I feel about this deck in this meta. It's something, again, like since like Rob Lucci and Ice Age are gone, like Rob Lucci's not gone, but since Ice Age is gone, specifically in Gecko Moria, we do have just a lot of access and freedom to play a larger body and know that our investment is usually a little bit safer than usual, which is really strong. We do have ways to 8-drop Doffy into like a Rosinante and then end the turn with like 3 Dawn open is really strong in its own way. We also do get to ramp to Shanks, which is a really good card to ramp to since this does have 10 and it does let us have 1 Dawn open at the end of a turn with our leader effect, as long as we have a different Don Quixote Pirates up, so that is helpful too. And or even if we have like less than 9 Dawn, like if we have like a Dawn minus somehow throughout the turn and then we can like Gatling it back, something like that can help us as well, getting that 1 extra Dawn open. So honestly, if this was a Straw Hat leader, this would be incredibly meta. It is not a Straw Hat leader, so it's just moderately meta. But I do think that there are some ways that this can adapt to what the builds look like, depending on what people are playing. We kind of have this issue where we are kind of dependent on your opponent attacking to us. So if we have a lot of aggro decks like either Zoro or Betty in this meta, or even Purple Luffy, being able to get out of their attacks and get rewarded by ramping at the same time is like a recipe for some success in its own way. So it would really depend on what the meta looks like and having to adapt for it. But if I was to say which Red Purple leader could be better, I think Sugar might actually have some chance if we play it like a little bit more defensively and we can kind of turn and play some big bodies to be really aggressive. So only thing I don't like about this deck is that we have to play so many events, so sometimes it's a little bit clunky, but if we do find the ordering that we need, we're in a really good spot. So there it is. And then while we're talking about Purple Doflamingo, or Don Quixote family leaders, we do have this green-purple leader. This is the least tested deck in this entire video, so I apologize. Do not just think that you can make this and it's good. But it's more of a theory crafting of like, you know what, all this purple stuff that we get from like the Doflamingo family is just really good. We can take advantage of pretty much all of it. I think like green Doflamingo is still very strong in its own way. You can still play Birdcage, so if Birdcage is a good card in this meta, obviously like Doflamingo being likely less present, and Rob Lucci and some others, it might just not be worth it. But if it is, that could be something that's good for us as well. But being able to have, like, again, this Doffy, which lets us, like, ramp back, but also let us play a 5-drop is really good. Hodie's been a really good card that we can play since we're a green deck. I feel like 10-drop Doffy against everything that's not Blackbeard is really good in this meta right now, too, being able to get that active stunning across the board. And I also really like this Giola against a really aggressive deck. So on your opponent's attack, once returned, you may rest 2 of your Dawn, rest up to 1 of your opponent's characters with a cost of 4 or less. So if they go really wide, like if you're playing against Zoro or something like that, you can just play this out for 2, you get your 2 Dawn back with your leader effect, and then you get to pretty much get out of 1 attack every turn for, quote unquote free, which can be helpful. So I think that's something that helps the deck. I think we get to play a lot of blockers like this Doflamingo. Here, it's Odyssey tag, but it just cares if you have another rested character, which even if you don't have anything on board, you can use like a Baby 5 or Sugar, use its search effect, then play out the Doffy, or attack with the Doffy, rather, if it was the only card on your board, you get that effect as well. So generally speaking, I think there's a lot of potential for Doflamingo. I'm not going to say that this deck is perfect, but I do want to do some testing with it and see if there's some ways that it can adapt to what this kind of meta looks like. So only thing I'll say is that 10-drop Teach might be a little bit of an issue for this meta, but it also means we can play Hodie Jones without the on-play taking a life, so that can be kind of good, and we'll see if that's the case. But I'm semi-optimistic, and I'm looking forward to seeing what Doffy looks like in this next meta. All right, next up we got Teach. And I'll be honest, this is probably the least creative deck on this whole video. You guys know what Teach looks like, right? This is not something that really has much flexibility for deck list like changes. We add the new Kuzan because this card is really good. I don't think you guys are really surprised about this. It just helps you like toolbox into any card you need whenever you need it. And it just doesn't, it has like this Omni, protection, which is really, really strong. So that's why like in Usopp, if you play a 7-drop Luffy, you can attack into this because it can't be removed from your opponent's effect, but it can still be removed by battle, which is really important. Obviously, the Burgess is in the same way. You can attack into it with the Luffy, and it means that they have to give you resources, which is really, really good, even though you can also bounce this back to hand with something like Heroes. So other than that, we know what this deck looks like, right? Being able to be more consistent with that is strong. We still have full lead access to us. We have Finger Pistol. And again, we lost our worst matchup in general, right? We don't have the Doflamingo. Now, if Zoro is like an issue for this deck, that could be something that makes it more present. And I did see a lot of Zoro again in like the first week of the meta on the rank ladder. So we'll see. I think that Teachers Guild are going to be really present, and you should know what this looks like. This is just an example list there. Like sincerely, like I'm pretty sure like this is not unique in any way. And even though I like legitimately plugged it into this builder, I'm sure that this is also someone else's build that they're legitimately sleeved up 50 for 50, since there's not much variation for this deck. So anyways, we also have Smoker, which this does feel really bad without Ice Age. I don't think like Smoker was like inherently broken with Ice Age, right? It was still like Rob Lucci kind of took it over the edge with the cards that it had in its arsenal, and being able to be like the better like Gecko Morio user, right? But we still get some ways to do some removal. I think 3-drop Hina is going to see a lot more play since it is just a -4 on play. So this is really good for us in general. I still think Tashigi is a really good card on combo, and since it's an activate main, the fact that you do get that removal from this effect is really good in its own way too. We also do have like Sakazuki, 2 copies of it. We are playing Jack as well, since this does let us just get that cycle and also get rid of a 3 or less. And then we're playing 4 Tempest Kicks because we do generally get to 10 cards in trash when it starts mattering with this deck, especially if we are able to resolve a couple copies of Sengoku. We don't really have anything in the deck that like bottom decks back into the deck, so that helps us too. We kind of managing that resources, and we also have like brand new. So generally, we just have to kind of hard mull into these, make sure we get our Tashigi, and then we get to get some good value for us too. So I really don't know if this is the best way to play it, but I do think like more of a there's like this version of like a lot of like black decks that were more kind of like tempo removal decks. You try to just like incrementally build a board while removing your opponents without like big tempo swings from Moria. And I think Smoker can definitely be a little bit around more with that, since honestly, the worst matchup I feel for Smoker half the time was Rob Lucci, because they just did everything you did but better more times than not, and that was just really tough to keep up with. So we'll see if that's the case, but I do think like Tashigi is something that Smoker has inherently, and that is still good enough to carry a lot of matchups in your own way. So there it is. And we also have Lucci, which I did say like Doffy was, it was hit, and it was kind of tough for it to exist without Jinbei, but I think it will still exist without Jinbei. I don't really know if Rob Lucci is going to be meta anymore, sincerely, right? We lost pretty much 2 cornerstones for our deck, right? We missed out on the Ice Age, and we missed out on the Moria. We were so dependent on both those cards for able to get our removal and tempo swings, and without it, we're a little lost, I feel like. So there could be builds for Rob Lucci that look nothing like this that could be viable. I think a lot of people are testing that right now, and we'll likely find a build or two that are moderately viable, if not, actually viable. But until then, I'm not really sure how to feel about this guy in the first place. So we are still playing Tashigi because we do get like the the trash with the activate main, so it can be some good removal if we need to. I also have like the patchwork. This just has like a weird effect for us to be able to give like the -3, and then also you can give something with a cost of 0 can't be active on your opponent's next refresh phase. So sometimes this is good enough for like a pseudo removal, where you do something like Tempest Kick and then Patchwork, and you can make it so like a 6K or 6 cost character can attack next turn, which if they don't get a next turn after that, you win and you got the removal technically. So this is sometimes good. It has like the trigger, and it's like the next best option now that we've lost Ice Age in this deck as well. So again, I don't really know how to feel about Rob Lucci. It might not be viable. Moria might be better, though. I think Moria also is missing Ice Age, since you did really need something to get your Absaloms in range of removal potential. So I don't know. Here's a build. Don't blame me if it's bad. I know it's bad, or at least untested in its own way. But here's Rob Lucci. And then lastly, we're going to end up with our yellow decks. We got Eustace, Captain Kidd. We also have Law as well as our yellow Supernovas. These decks didn't really lose anything, right? Neither of these decks generally ran Kingdom Come. Sometimes Useless Kid would run it occasionally, just because we are kind of like an end game like blocker deck with removal potential. But I don't think it was really affected that much. I do think like Doffy was also sometimes like a bit of a scary matchup, and also Ice Age removed a lot of our late game cards, including our 8-drop Captain Kidd, which now gets a little bit more body, like it gets to survive on board a little bit more consistently, especially as a blocker with their leader effect as well. So I think all that is very good. I do think like the burn damage from Basil Hawkins is going to come up a little bit more, but it can still be bounced back from a Trafalgar Law, and then also like our like 7-drops and stuff. So we are playing 3 copies of the Damned Punk, just being able to get some removal and sometimes rearrange our life, especially if we need to have the top card of our life face down so we can flip it face up for our leader effect. And then we do just kind of have like our tempo for it. So I think this deck is still fine. Like I don't think it's bad. I do think we have to be worried about like faster aggressive decks, but also the fact that we do such burn damage in the late game can be very helpful in its own way. So there it is. We also have Trafalgar Law, which we do appreciate, again, the kind of combination of Doffy and Rob Lucci not being around as often. I kind of feel like we still take a lot of cards from our life very quickly, and so that can make some more aggressive matches very tough for us. We do still have blockers, we still have Useless Captain Kidd and everything that's kind of associated with it, but sometimes I feel like we're like a 2-life leader that just gets to play 2/5 costs very easily. So I did put the Bonney in here just because if your leader has Supernova's type and the number of life cards is equal to or less than your opponent's life cards, which I would assume is most of the game anyways, you get to add up to one of your opponent's characters with cost of 4 or less to the top or bottom of your owner's life face up. So I feel like this can be really good for getting rid of like a 3-drop chopper for in the early game or something like that where your opponent's getting a lot of advantage. We get to slow down the game a little bit. It's a 5-drop Supernova, which is really helpful. And then if we're able to like set up with an 8-drop Kid, we're in a really good spot. So I really don't know what Trafalgar Law is going to look like, if it's going to be meta. I know a lot of people love the character and they love what it gets to do. So there will be a lot of people grinding for it. And there might be a build that ends up being viable in this meta, but I just don't know what it is 100%. So, but this is the one that I've been playing with a little bit. And it has potential, but I wouldn't say this is perfected in any way. And then we've got 2 more builds, and then you guys kind of know what like the more traditional build of Enel looks like. So I decided to make more of like an aggressive leaning build since one, we can't be really defensive if we don't have Kingdom Come anymore. Like our kind of ace in the hole for removing 1 big body every turn is not existent in this game anymore. So we're kind of pivoting to more kind of aggressive. So the reasoning for that is that we do still have our boys Omen Holy. Being able to use these to get like a wide board very early is really helpful. We do still have the Enel, and also the Captain Kid we mentioned earlier. It doesn't really, there's no actual reason to only play it in Supernova decks, right? This being an 8-drop 9K that, one, lets you like burn a damage. It also lets us like draw 1 and trash 1 if your opponent's life is at 2 or less, which I would imagine is pretty often. And then also, like just being able to attack as a 9K every turn afterwards, I think is very, very strong. So we have the Enel, we have the Ace. We also are playing some copies of Did Someone Say Kami, which might be bad, but the fact that we can cycle with this a little bit better is good. I felt like we needed more cards with Trigger for our Nami's effects as well. And it's really easy to do something where like you use Useless Captain Kidd. We use the effect to trash a 7-drop Enel from our hand at the end of turn effect, and then at the start of the next turn, we can use the event to be able to play it for only 4. So we have a lot more Dawn at our disposal to be fairly aggressive. And sometimes people just don't like play around this card, and so they think that they're fine, and then you play a rush card for 4, and then you put the rest of your Dawn on it, and then they just kind of lose. So I think it has some potential, and I think generally the most difficult thing about that card was that we didn't always have a great way to put an L into our trash, but with the 8-drop kit, I think it's pretty solid in its own way. So our also ability to just not lose very quickly due to our leader effect is really nice too. And I think we get a lot of advantage from it. So there it is. And then last deck for us, it is Balo Betty. And it's a fast, aggressive deck. I don't think this deck has changed a lot. And this build is just 50 cards I put together. There's likely better builds for this, but I do think it's something that is aggressive and does have potential in this format as well. I think generically Zoro is probably still better, or at least more consistent than this deck, but I do know people love it, and I think it's definitely has a potential to shine right now with, again, Doflamingo being very easily its worst matchup, and it's not gone, but it's not as powered as it used to be. And then also Rob Lucci kind of in the same boat where it's not as easy for it to get removal, And also the lack of 8-drop Moria means that their their toolbox of answers is a little bit smaller and more specific. So this could have a time to shine. We'll see if that's the case or not. But I did want to just kind of put one Betty build here too. But I feel like I've been talking for too long. You guys can probably tell me that I am. But that's just kind of my base of like decks that I think are moderately viable, if not super viable in the set. There's clearly more decks that can be. I haven't mentioned stuff like Nami or even like there's just like a lot of other decks that I haven't mentioned either. But these are the ones that I felt like at least changed a little bit in this meta, or in my mind were like clearly present in one way or the other. And I just kind of wanted to have like a good baseline for people trying to jump into OP10 as well. So that's going to be it for me. Let me know what you guys think. Let me know if my decks are trash. I'd love to hear ways to make them better. I'm going to continue to update my site with the OP10 stuff as we get it here in the English version of the card game, and I'm looking forward to it, as you guys are likely as well. So that's going to be it for me. Thank you for watching, and I'll catch you all next time.